Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Stir of Echoes. Very weird title. It just makes me want to go and just do like a stirring motion through this review, weirdly, because it's just a weird, goofy motion to do. So, Stir of Echoes. We have a Kevin Bacon movie here, and this movie reminds me of like the Stephen King Dead Zone, or is to remind me of like Conjuring films and a number of other just kind of ghost kinds of movies at some point. Besides actually Patrick Swayze and Whoopi Goldberg and Demi Moore's movie Ghost. Because there's only so many times that you can make a pot, right? Oh my! Moving on. So, Stir of Echoes is a very weird, goofy title for a film. But I actually enjoy the movie. There is a couple of scenes where you're like, that's kind of gross. And hopefully I'll go on before we get into spoilers and mention them to you. So that way you can be prepared for these moments. You can go on like, yeah, I'm just going to do one of these for a couple of seconds. And then I'm just going to come right back. Because, yeah, I just don't want to see that kind of stuff. So, there you go. I'll do that in a second here. So, this movie is technically in a lot of different apps for absolutely free. Vudu, Tubies, basically a lot of apps of which that you can go on and see this movie. I think Freevee may have this, not quite sure. But eventually it's free in a lot of certain apps, so dare in fact go ahead and check it out. So, Stir of Echoes. There is to be certain moments in this movie that might have you go, ooh, and we'll talk about those now. So, Tom is to go into a bathroom in one point of this film, and is to lose a tooth by him pulling it out. So letting you know that when there is a bathroom scene, especially with a sink involved, eventually you could probably just go on and just turn your head to the side for a second, and then or a couple of seconds until somebody is to be pulling some tooth out, and then you should be fine. When we get into the flashbacky scenes that deal with Samantha, the ghost in this story, there is a moment where we have this nail where like the hand is to be like this, and then the nail ends up going like pa, and I'm just like, oh my god, that is freaking gross. I hate things that they do with either teeth or nails. It just gives me nightmares. But hence why you can justifiably go on and just turn off to the side a little bit, if you know what I mean. That scene happens twice in this film. I don't know why they decided to go back to that thing, even though I get it. It's to have tied back some of the stuff that they saw before, but still, it's gross. So, now, with that said, with those three scenes said, Stir of Echoes, what is this movie about? So, we have Tom, who's played by Kevin Bacon, who eventually is to go to this party with a number of friends of his, and he is to have a relative within his family, his wife's sister, that is to somehow be a hypnotist of sorts, and Tom is to go on and say like, yeah, right, like, I don't believe that you're a hypnotist, hypnotize me. So, Tom gets hypnotized by Lisa, and Tom after that is to be forever changed. To him going on and not being able to reverse what Lisa had done to him. And so now basically Tom is effed, but not only that, Tom is to also have a son named Jake, who is to have a little bit better grasp of the ability that Tom possesses, because somehow or another, Tom's kind of shining kind of gene, if you've ever seen the movie The Shining, oh yeah, that's basically like this, The Shining, Stir of Echoes. So, I just thought of that. I'm like, why didn't I think of that before? So Jake is to go on and have a better grasp on this ability where his father is just new to it. So he's just going on and like, yeah, I'm not, I have to figure this out. I have to beat it, whatever it is. So it can just be without of me, or to not be like haunting me, so to speak. So Tom is to figure out this mystery and is to get little pieces here and there to try and put things together. And also, Tom is to go on and do miraculous things within this film that Maggie, his wife, is to get more and more worried during this film, to the point of it seeming that their relationship may be at jeopardy because Tom is to be so selfish and to go on and be thinking of this one goal and this one goal alone to solve this to solve this tale, to no longer be haunted by it, that everything else is to take a back seat. His entire life is to stop as we know it so Tom can figure this thing out. So with that said, that kind of goes on and really is to give me my kind of figure out my grading system upon this movie. I would say that Stir of Echoes is a good movie. It's an interesting movie. Definitely a thumbs up. I enjoyed Stir of Echoes. I think there is a sequel to this that has Rob Lowe in it, or just has another Stir of Echoes movie that I think is called Stir of Echoes Homecoming. Don't know what that's about. I had seen maybe a brief clip of that probably towards the end of the movie, randomly somewhere, but never really saw the film. So with that said, let's go on. And this movie I think is available on a number of different apps for absolutely free. Tubi, Vudu's, maybe Freevee, the like the new app that is technically tied to Amazon right now. So definitely you can check out Stir of Echoes fairly easily. And so now I don't have to actually go on and rattle off the number of bootleg apps that I've used over time. You can go on and find that information probably in a number of new releases that I have gone on and done recently. So eventually you'll probably find that somewhere. So with that said, the Stir of Echoes. Let's go and double fire this bad boy up, if I can count, because my hand. Because it's about that time again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. So, with that said, in the very beginning of this movie, we have Tom who is going on and playing this guitar while Jake is taking a bath. So, it seems that Tom and Maggie are to have this baby monitor with them to either kind of have on them while Jake is to go to sleep so they can kind of hear or listen if he has any problems, or they go on and hand this baby monitor to whoever is to babysit him. And so they can go on and just kind of see if he's eventually still awake while he's supposed to be asleep. So Tom goes on and is to get Jake out of the tub, put a towel over him, and so Tom and Jake are bickering about the PJs that, of course, Jake is to wear. Fire trucks or bugs, and Jake wants bugs. So Tom has to go out of his way to find these pajamas. And so Tom is to then go downstairs to see that Lisa is meeting up with Maggie, hugging it out like sisters would normally do. So all of a sudden, Lisa is to go on and mention to Maggie that she's like, "Oh my God, you're pregnant," and Maggie didn't say a word. And so all of a sudden now Maggie has to then go on and tell Tom that she's also pregnant, that she's been like 6 weeks pregnant. So uh so Tom is to not take this news very well. He's like, bummer. Oh. Eh. So Maggie's like, oh well thanks. Thanks for the positive reinforcement. So then Maggie goes into the other room, and so Tom goes and tosses the PJs to Lisa, and is to tell Lisa to go on and put the PJs on Jake. So, of course, Tom can try to make this right, which he really doesn't. So, Tom then goes on and is to speak to Maggie and tell her it's like, hey, yeah, a baby's great. Like, you know what? I was just gonna talk about us having another baby, and and man, did we like not have to have that discussion? We're already having one. Oh, isn't that great? And Maggie's like, you piece of. So all of a sudden, we turn around and have this conversation. Turn into Tom mentioning what he's gonna go on and do in the future when she has this other baby. And Tom is telling Maggie, it's like, yeah, you should really take time off for this. And Maggie's like, we don't have the money for that. And Tom is to go on and say, like, well, hey, like, I'll just go on and do like extra shifts uh, at work to just kind of make up for like the eventually Maggie not being at work. And Maggie's like, well, no, like if you go on and do that, like you'll be a zombie, like you'll be useless to me. And Maggie wants to continue to go on and get some of that loving from Tom. So hence why even in this movie we see them getting some loving within this film, and then Tom is having some uh, mind issues, some psychic things coming into his brain noggin. That is to just give him a headache and be like, "No, honey, not tonight." So, but we'll get to that. So, Tom is to have mentioned that he was going to try to get this band back together, and Maggie's like, "Oh yeah, you were saying that you were wanting to go on and put this band together, and now like you must hate me because you're not going to be able to do that." And Tom is to say it's like, well, like, hey, like if anything, like that's too bad, but like Thomas also say that he was to always have these hopes and these dreams, and that eventually he wants to someday uh, go on and live up to what he had said in the past, that he wants to accomplish these hopes and these dreams, and that Maggie was to say it's like, well, hey, like Tom, I didn't want you to be famous, and Tom's like, no, I just didn't want to be ordinary, and so he ends up walking off. So eventually, later in the movie, we have Maggie who is to throw that in his face when they're arguing, and is to go on and say it's like, well, hey, when you say that you don't want to be ordinary, that's all saying that like us, like the whole family, is to all just be this ordinary family. And like that kind of ticked her off. But she didn't say it until later, until they actually had this argument. So moving on. So we go on and they go to this neighbor's party, and they're all drinking it up. Thomas go on and have this baby monitor. So we have at points where we have Frank who's looking at a woman's cleavage, and is to have his wife be like, how dare you? So we're going on and having some interactions with a number of people. And so we have these kind of like joking things where at some points, like Harry is to mention to Tom, like, "Hey, what are you doing to my house over there? You're not destroying my house over there." And Tom could just be like, "Well, who's living in the house? Is it you? No? Well, then it's technically my house, but freaking whatever." He's making payments for it. It's his house, but whatever. Just bitter biddies. So at some point, people start thinning out within this party, and so there's just a number of people left. So uh, we all of a sudden have certain kind of jokes being tossed around, and so Lisa is to be telling this story about a guy who was to have gotten surgery done on him while he was hypnotized. Like a scalpel was to go into him, and people could see the mark. And so Frank and Tom are in this skeptic thing of things where they're like, bullshit. Like, no, that's not true. So we have Lisa that's like, well, hey, like no, it's true. And so Tom is like, okay, hypnotize me so we can prove you wrong. So Lisa then goes on and is to prepare Tom to close his eyes and then imagine he's in this this theater, and that the theater is empty and it's a movie theater, and that at some point Tom is sitting in this chair, eventually having him getting closer and closer to the screen that is to have a number of words, and Tom ends up getting closer and closer to the screen, and all of a sudden once he finally reads the words, it says sleep. So Tom finally wakes up, and Frank is going on and on about all the stuff that Tom had done, mentioning about some bully that Tom had faced before called Joey Luco, or Luco? I'm going to go with that. So Tom is to mention, like, yeah, that was like a childhood bully of mine, and also Lisa was to ask about Tom's hand because Lisa had stabbed into him with this needle, or this bobby pin, and Tom didn't feel it. And so Tom was going on and on about all of this stuff. So from Frank's perspective, so Lisa was to be surprised that Tom was in the lucky 8% who was to be able to get hypnotized. But what we find out later is that Lisa, before waking Tom up, was to tell him to be, in the future, a lot more open-minded, and that a couple of words was to send Tom off on a journey that he did not want. So, right after this party, we also had Tom, who was to get a certain set of images that were really to affect him, and he was to be fairly afraid. So, Tom is to tell Maggie that he's not feeling well, that he thinks that they should just go home. I think after Tom was to go on and consistently get hypnotized, he is, or to at some point get some visions or see a ghost, he is to massively swig a bunch of liquid from somewhere, water, beer, orange juice, to have Tom eventually get a whole refrigerator just full of orange juice. And Maggie's like, okay, that, I guess that happened, oddly. To where Tom pours Maggie a thing of orange juice and then it's gonna ask her, "Hey, you gonna drink that?" And then he drinks it, and it's like, okay, well, like I guess you're still mad at me, but we'll hopefully get to that at some point during what those scenes were. So Tom, Maggie are to, of course, go home, and so Tom is to feel a little bit weird, and so all of a sudden, both Tom and Maggie are to both be in bed together, and all of a sudden, we have them in the midst of throes of passion, and Maggie is to go on and get on top of Tom here, and all of a sudden, we start to have Tom that is starting to get these psychic visions that he needs to pull away from Maggie, and all of a sudden Maggie is to think that's nothing wrong, but then all of a sudden she is to have Tom mention that he just felt somehow like attacked. And Maggie's like, wow, like what a way to just what a way to just like butter up your wife. And so Kevin's like, no, or Tom's like, no, I didn't mean it like that. It was just something that I just saw in my brain. So Tom then goes on, and here, of course, is when we in the early part of this movie are to get this tooth that falls out scene, as Tom is his tooth. And I'm like, no, that's a little gross. So we have Tom who goes to his living room after he is to go on and find something to drink. And all of a sudden, Tom is to like feel very antsy, just kind of like very like he can't sleep. So all of a sudden, Tom is sitting next to this couch, and all of a sudden, Samantha appears, and we of course have Tom that freaks the F out, justifyingly. So Tom just starts to take time off at work. So much time off at work that he will get into trouble with his work. But Tom continues to just take this time off, like 12 days it seems, that he is to have sick days, and he takes all of them. So we, and hopefully I've gone on and kind of mostly cover this movie so far, because I already feel like I missed a step or two. I forgot a something or other, but let's go into it. So now within the we also have the moment where Jake is in the tub and he's talking to a ghost, and Jake ends up asking the ghost like, hey, what does death feel like? And so I guess he ends up getting an answer because he's starting to question these ghosts. And I thought that was really chilling. That was very, like, ugh. So Jake is to go on and start just talking to an imaginary friend his parents assume. But Jake is actually talking to Samantha. And so it seems that Jake can talk to her, but I don't think he can actually see her. So, but we push on here. So, the following day we have Maggie that is trying to look for babysitters, as we have Tom who's going off to work. So Maggie, of course, is calling these babysitters, and she, of course, is to call her sister, and her sister doesn't answer because she's hungover. So Maggie goes on and is to get a recommendation from her own son about a girl named Debbie, to call a girl named Veronica to ask about a girl named Debbie. And so Maggie's like, "Oh yeah, that sounds like a really good idea." Not even thinking about it. So Maggie calls Debbie up, and coming to find out, Debbie, something about Debbie just doesn't just go quite right, and we'll get to those scenes, of course. So we have Tom that goes to work, and he is to be this electrician on this phone tower, or this kind of electrical thing, and he's fixing it away. So Tom is to go on and call Lisa, and is to ask her what she did last night, and is to go on and talk about him being much more open minded. And Tom's like, "What does that mean?" And so Lisa's like, "Well, I just opened a door and I just opened a window and that's all I did." And Tom's like, "That, like, you did more than just open a window. Like, you opened up, like, every room in the entire house. And what a mistake that was." Like, you went on and opened the garage door also. And no, like, shut all that stuff down. So, um, Tom then is to uh, go on and have this new babysitter show up at his house, and Tom is very uneasy about this babysitter. So Maggie is to go on and give Debbie this baby monitor to just like, hey, you're gonna just kind of look out for him. So all of a sudden, oddly, we start to have Tom, who is to see these like red flashes, or is to see just a bunch of red wherever he is to go, probably giving him the signal to either stop, or that maybe this red signal somewhere is a sign for him to do something. So Tom all of a sudden is to see this red sign, or this red flash in front of Debbie, and so he's not quite sure what that means. So Tom asks Maggie about Debbie. It's like, well, hey, do we trust this girl with our son? Like, we've never really known her before. And Maggie's like, yeah, I think she's trustworthy. Like, she's been recommended. So Tom's like, okay. So both Tom and Maggie are to go on to this. I think it's this like college game, because we have, of course, Frank, who is to boast on and on and on about his son, and like how his son has a bright future and he's such an athlete and this and that, and how like Frank had some possibilities in the past to be as good as his son, but one thing led to the other. So yeah, Frank is going on and on about his son and how great he is. So come to find out, in this movie, not so great. Uh, yeah, no. So we go on to this film, and I want to I'm trying to think of who exactly is who in this movie, because of last names. Um, so I may get something incorrect here, but that will eventually happen anyways. So so going on. So Tom is to make it to the stadium, and he sees so many of these flashes, and he has this feeling that something wrong is going to happen to Jake, and he needs to leave this place. So Tom runs off to go back home, and Maggie is following behind him, and all of a sudden Tom is to realize that his son is gone from the house, and so is Debbie. So, come to find out, Jake was woken up by Samantha. And so we have Jake who's talking and is to mention how, like, yeah, Debbie's downstairs. I haven't seen her yet. So Debbie comes upstairs to ask what or who Jake was talking about. And Jake is to mention it's a girl named Samantha. So all of a sudden, Debbie is to grab Jake, run him off to the Metro Logan station. I know the word Logan is somewhere used in there. Metro, this train station, let's just say, to be safe. I know the first word is Metro, but I don't remember what the rest of it is. So we have Tom, who is to be running all around town, and he is to kind of look in certain directions, and he is to get the red signal to tell him to go that area. So Tom is to find out exactly where Jake is, and it's the station. And so Tom then is to use his ability to figure out where Jake is, pull him away from Debbie, and like the police are to be run over, or the police are to run over there to say, hey, what's going on between the two of you? So we all of a sudden have Debbie's mother that comes over there. It's like, hey, like, she came here because of me, and so like, kind of don't like, take it easy on her, like it was all my fault. So Tom and Maggie are to be talking to Debbie, and so Debbie is to say, like, somehow Jake is to know Samantha, somehow he was talking to her, and how does this boy know Samantha randomly? And so all of a sudden Debbie is to show this photo of Samantha to both Tom and Maggie, and Tom is to now go on and is to realize that that was the girl that he had seen before, and Tom was to go on and tell Maggie that he had saw this ghost, and Maggie had gotten supposedly jealous because right after she was supposed to get her lovin', she instead was to have Tom go off and be fantasizing about some other woman. That seems wrong. So Maggie is to be tempted to press charges against the girl, and Tom is like, no, like, let's just leave it be. Like, I think she's learned a valuable lesson here. So, but Maggie's like, but what if she goes on and does this again? And Tom is just like, I don't think she will. I think this is just a one-off occurrence. So Tom is to tell Maggie that he knows Samantha, and then Tom is to at some point go on and start asking a number of people within the town about Samantha as if they know her. To ask, like, hey, do you guys know Samantha? Hey, do any of you know Samantha? Going on and having like, Tom ask Frank about Samantha. It's like, no, like, I don't know. And then all of a sudden we have Tom asking Harry and his son and Frank's son, and like, it seems that they were going on of like, oh no, like, I don't know anything about her either. And this one guy keeps saying that Samantha was like slow or something along those lines, and Frank is to go on and shut that guy up, because it's like, hey, like, don't say that kind of language. Don't say that about that girl. Like, come on. Kind of giving us some uneasement about why Frank was quick to just snuff that guy out from saying all that. So we Then after Tom is to have questioned everybody and asked everyone about Samantha, we have Maggie that is to talk to Lisa about both Tom and both Jake, and how it seems that Tom and Jake are to have these private conversations between one another, and when Maggie gets in the room, they're much more quiet. And Tom, when he is to bring Jake home, is to ask him about Samantha. And it's like, oh, so you know Samantha, so you've seen her, right? Like, you know it, like you've talked to her before, right, Jake? And Maggie's like, hey, stop like pestering our son about this. And Tom's like, no, I just need to know these answers, and like our son is right here, I'm gonna ask him this. So Jake eventually is to just kind of walk away. And like there's even a point where Jake would rather tell Tom to speak with Samantha instead of him. And Tom's like, how did you do that voice, Jake? Do the voice again, Jake. How'd you do that? So just keep like pushing and pushing and pushing. So pushing along. So the next day, we of course have Tom, who is to consistently be on the couch, that he falls asleep on it. And so he supposedly wakes up to find his shoes, and all of a sudden we have Frank, who is telling Tom that, I'm going to pause here for a second. All right. So Tom is to go on and get his shoes, and then is to find Frank appearing in his home, telling him that someone is going to kill him. Someone is going to kill them both. And Tom is kind of very baffled by Frank not only being in his home, but saying this very weird thing. So Tom then goes out to try to figure out what Frank was saying, and Frank goes on and is to mention about the neighborhood and how this used to be a decent neighborhood. And again, Tom is very confused. So Tom all of a sudden is to make his way to where Frank's house is, and is to talk to Frank's son, who I believe is Adam. So we have Tom talking to Frank's son, and Frank is to mention that he has something. And Tom is like, okay, like what do you have? All of a sudden Frank's son is to pull out this gun, and Tom is like, whoa. Like, how about you put the gun away? And so the more and more Tom tries to do something with this gun, the more the gun goes off, and Tom is to kind of hope that he's dreaming or something else is really going on here, because a lot of this just doesn't make sense. So all of a sudden, Tom is to wake up from this dream, and he's like, okay, that was weird, I'm still on the couch. So Tom is to find that his shoes that were in this dream were in the same spot when he woke. And Tom, of course, was to say that he hoped his other shoe wasn't where it was in the dream. So Tom gets his shoes, and it seems that there's no Frank, but there's still a lot of things that kind of echo what Tom was to see from before. So Tom goes on to make his way to Frank's house to then hear a gunshot after Tom is to try to knock on this door, hoping someone's home. Tom hears a gunshot. He breaks open this window, rushes into the room to try to uh, hope that he can stop the bleeding from Frank's son. And so Tom, of course, is screaming help. And so Frank's son is to be hauled away via this ambulance. And we have Tom that is to just kind of watch on, seeing both Frank and his wife just kind of be in shock of their son going from this ambulance. At some point, Tom is to ask Frank how Frank's son is doing, and it's like, well, like he may live, he may not. Like it's still kind of it's still up in the air right now, but that happens later. So Tom, uh, Maggie is to say it's like, hey, can't we just kind of go on and kind of just get away, maybe do a walk, maybe just go somewhere. So while Maggie and Jake are going and doing that, we of course have Tom who's going to Lisa and saying like, hey, whatever you did to me, correct. Like whatever you did, undo it. Do it now. So so Maggie is going on with Jake, and so Jake continues on to this graveyard, to this funeral that is being put together. And so all of a sudden, Jake is to see a police officer named Neil, and Neil goes on and is to wave at Jake, and Jake is to wave back. All of a sudden, Neil and Maggie are to walk away because Maggie's to grab Jake, saying that we shouldn't be here. So Jake and Maggie are walking along this graveyard, and Neil is to follow them. So all of a sudden, Maggie is to notice Neil behind them, and Maggie is telling Neil, it's like, oh, so are we not welcome here? Like, should we get out of here? Is this trespassing? What's going on? And Neil's like, no, like, you guys are fine. Like, everything's fine. And so we start to have Neil that is to go on and start to tell Maggie that Jake is to have like a really like bright light, like and he must not go on and get that from her. He gets it from his daddy, but like his daddy wasn't to have gone on and get this ability until now. And Maggie is looking at Neil kind of confused, and Neil's like X-ray, like I can see things, I can kind of see stuff like and figure it all out. So we all of a sudden have Neil and Jake know one another without an exchanging a word to either one of them, and Neil is to also give Maggie this card to tell him like, hey, if Tom wants to know more about his gift, like give him this card. So we have Tom that goes to Lisa's, and Lisa, I guess, is with a woman, with the like either a client or a possible date. And so Tom is to talk to Lisa, saying that he needs to correct what she did now. So Lisa goes on and forcibly does so. So Lisa is to try to do this hypnotic thing that she did before, and Tom is in this theater and it's all black, and Tom at one point is stubbornly saying that there's someone in the theater, and Lisa is saying no, the theater is empty. So Tom then goes on and is to try to touch the shoulder of the person in the theater, and come to find out that this is Samantha in some plastic bag, and consistently Tom is saying that he can't breathe, and that it's cold, and this and that. So Lisa is to finally pull Tom out of this hypnosis, and Tom is to grab a swig of this Bud Light, and Lisa's like, "Oh my god, like you should have like to have seen you. Oh my god, this was crazy." And so Tom was to try to go on and tell Lisa what he was to kind of experience there. So uh so Tom also, when he was to finally look at the movie screen before he was to wake, instead of it saying sleep this time around, it weirdly said dig. And so Tom is telling Lisa that he's going to have to dig somehow or another, whatever that means. And honestly, dig doesn't actually work technically with what Tom is going to have to do, but it kind of feels like they couldn't have used any other word to uh, really make Tom be curious about where he should go on and look for things. So Tom is to continue to see these images and see these things and see these flashes. And so Tom is to go on and dig this hole, this massive hole in his backyard. And Maggie is going into her home after her job and realizing there's dirt all over the house, and she's like, "Well, I'm not cleaning that up." She opens the refrigerator to see a number of orange juice in there. Tom is to get all these, go shopping for all these shovels and all these pickaxes and all these things. So Maggie is to go on and is to get this fax from her brother mentioning about her grandmother that is taken ill. So Tom is to go on and start digging, and Maggie is to try to tell Tom, like, hey, you should just try to go on and, like, you should stop what you're doing. Like, you should, like, you need to go on, you need to go back to work, you need to go on and do all these things. And so Tom is going on and saying, no, like, I have to go on and I have to do this. I have to dig. There's nothing else that I am going to do but dig. So Maggie's like, well, both Tom and Maggie start getting into an argument. And so Maggie is to like start throwing it at Tom about the whole ordinary thing that he had said before. So we have Maggie that is to get this phone call. And before that happens, Tom is with Maggie in his kitchen, and Maggie's to mention about the facts from her brother and mentioning about her grandmother. And after Tom pours himself some 2 glasses of OJ, he is to start to say something about Maggie's grandmother, and then he stops. And Maggie's like, what? What were you about to say? And Tom is like, nope. So Maggie answers this phone call. Come to find out her grandmother is passed away. And Tom goes back into the yard and is going to give Maggie her privacy. Tom is to let Jake help dig these holes, but the body is to not really probably be where Jake is, but he's volunteering. Jake is helping. So Tom goes on and is to try to water the mud so he can dig more. So Maggie goes on and is to tell Tom the news, of which he already knew. And so when Maggie hugs Tom, she's like, "You knew, didn't you?" And he's like, "When is the funeral?" Like, he already knew. So let me pause again for 1 second. My apologies. So let's go on. So we have Tom that is to still say that he is to only want to go on and dig this hole, and even somebody dying is not going to change that, as well as Maggie telling him when the funeral is, and I think it's on Sunday. So Tom is asking Maggie, it's like, "Well, should I really go? Like, it's your family thing." And Maggie's like, "Huh?" So Maggie takes Jake with her. So Tom's still digging away. So Tom is to go on, and since he is finding no results in his yard, Tom is to go down into his cellar. While I think Maggie at some point was to try and want to go on and get like a warm bath, um, or warm shower for herself. No, it was a warm bath, and she wanted um, Tom to light um, the furnace, and Tom was too focused on trying to figure out what the song was. And Maggie goes in the furnace, and she accidentally has the light go out, and she ends up bumping her head, and she's bleeding from her head. And all of a sudden, while she comes back, she all of a sudden is seeing Tom, who just kind of frozen in place, getting touched by Samantha, having Tom seeing some flashbacks of Samantha in this home. And so Tom is to kind of see these little moments, but he doesn't see the whole picture going on, and getting these little moments here and there, but he doesn't get the full thing. So Tom is now in this basement, in this cellar, or this basement. I think that's the better word. So Tom is to try to adjust this water, but then he realizes that maybe he needs to dig in this basement with this concrete, and so Tom just keeps chucking away with this pickaxe. So the pickaxe doesn't work, so he goes on and he gets like a jackhammer, he gets a sledgehammer, he goes on and gets a uh, a like he was looking at a generator, but I think he went on and got something else. It's been a while since I've had to like say some of these words here, because I've lifted them, I've moved them, I've whatevered them, but it's been so long. We also had air compressor. Yeah, air compressor, I think it's the word that I was trying to say there. Um, Tom got an air compressor and got that and hauled that away. So into his home so he could use this jackhammer. So Tom is trying to get into this concrete, and he can't. He's too exhausted. So Tom then is to finally go on, and all of his neighbors are like, "What the is he doing?" We have Harry that's like, "Oh my god, what is this guy doing? That's my home. He's butchering." So Tom goes on to have this sledgehammer that he's swinging back and forth, and this sledgehammer leads to this opening and Tom starts pulling this away, and is to see these plastic, I think they look like mattress bags to me. Um, like the mattress bags that you would get when you would buy a mattress, and because that's kind of like the way that they look. But um, these are probably just plastic. But anyways, pushing on. So Tom is to pull away from this and to open these things up, and is to find a corpse with a coat there. And so Tom touches the coat and is to finally get the whole story. So Tom holds on, and so now we find out that Samantha was to be peer pressured by these two boys. I believe both Adam and both Kurt. It seems that Kurt does most of the heavy douchebaggery, as the other guy just kind of watches back. So, and this ends up being Harry's son. So, we have both of these guys going to Samantha and telling her, it's like, well, hey, like, you know what? Maybe we should like finally be friends. Like, if anything, you're really pretty, and so how about like you go into this house that is like under construction, and like just let's go into this home and let's be friends. So Samantha is to be peer pressured into this to maybe get a boyfriend. Maybe that's what she is to go on and want here. But then it's to realize that maybe she went to the wrong guy, sadly enough. So, but Samantha is peer pressured here. So, Samantha goes into this place with these guys, and all of a sudden it seems that Kurt is to start kissing on Samantha, but kissing leads to other things. And Samantha's like, no, I don't think I want any of that. And Kurt just keeps going on and is to go further and further to where Sam is getting more and more uncomfortable. To where Kurt, of course, is to go too far. Because Kurt, of course, is to want to go too far. So Samantha then is to want to leave here and want to like yell for help. But all of a sudden, we find these guys that may be in a problemed situation, and these guys are to really just want this girl no matter what it takes, horrifically. So these guys just push this girl down and is to hold her down, and then one of the guys end up getting one of these this bit of plastic and is to put it over her head. But the problem is, all of a sudden, with while doing that, this girl starts to lose air, because if anybody is to see any of those movies where somebody used to put a plastic bag over their head, they can't breathe. So Samantha is to suffocate, and eventually this leads to Samantha's death. So now Tom is going to go on and try to do the right thing. Even though he knows this whole story and is to know the forensics part of it also, because Samantha is to pull one of the hairs of one of the men and is to have it in her hand still as a corpse. So Tom is to say, it's like, yeah, like she has evidence that these guys did this to her, and they're going to go away for a long time. So Frank goes to, or Tom goes to Frank, and it's to say, it's like, hey, like, you know what, like, we're really good friends, so I'm going to tell you this first before, like, the news gets a hold of it, and, like, the police get a hold of it. Like, I'm going to tell you first. And so, like, Frank, can you come to me to my house? And so Frank's like, what's this about? And Tom's like, just come with me. So Tom is waiting on Frank, because Frank is saying, hey, wait a minute, like, let me get a coat. So Frank goes to Tom's house, and Frank tells Tom, it's like, this better be serious. And Tom is like, well, we'll get there. So Tom then is to take Frank to this basement and is to show him this body, and Tom is to tell Frank this whole story, and Frank is to go on and say, it's like, well, there's no real evidence that this girl was to do anything, and Frank is to be told by Tom that, hey, she has a lock of his hair. It's open and shut. So Frank is to go on and have a gun, and is to have been sitting on this whole secret for 6 months. Because eventually, when the kids were to have gotten themselves in trouble, the kids had gone to their parents to try to figure out a way to hide this secret. So, both of these kids' parents are to know about the secret, and Frank has known about it for 6 months. So, Frank is to be tempted to get Tom out of this room, and so Frank is to start firing these bullets, and then Tom is to hear a gunshot, and Tom is to assume that Frank is dead. So now we have Tom that is trying to leave this place to call the cops, and all of a sudden we have Maggie that was to also be calling Tom at this home. So Maggie is telling Tom, it's like, well, hey, like I want to go on, and like I want to come and get you and bring you here, because Tom is to say that he's finally given up. That he's finally given up on this whole thing. The visions are all gone. Somehow it's all resolved itself. And so Maggie's like, okay, sure, then I'll come home and I'll pick you up. And Tom is like, no, you just kind of stay there, and you stay with your family. And Maggie's like, no, I'm gonna come and pick you up. Like I'll go and I'll be there in an hour. And Tom is like, no. So realizing that Tom is lying to her again. But we also had Maggie, who was to meet up with Neil and not have Tom meet up with Neil. And Tom or Maggie is to go on in the shady neighborhood and bring this knife with her to talk to Neil, and come to find out, Maggie is to tell Neil that of course Tom is this skeptic. He won't believe anything that Neil is saying to him, and so Neil is to go on and tell Maggie that for some reason or another, this ghost wants either Tom or Jake to do something for her, and if they don't go on and do it, the ghost is going to get more and more upset and lash out somehow or another. So Jake at one point is to go on and is to take this bath, or is to no. Is to watch this movie while his mother was taking that bath in this part of the film, and Jake is to consistently be watching one cartoon, but all of a sudden it shifts to horror, and Jake is to go on and say, no, like I don't want to get in trouble with my mom, but no matter what Jake does, he even turns off the TV, and the TV still shows this horror movie. So every time Jake is saying no to this ghost, the ghost tries to go on and does something to just tick Jake off. So, but Jake is now back with his mother in this place, and so Maggie is saying that she's going to go on and pick up Tom and asks Jake if he wants to go back with her back home. And Jake is saying, like, no, I don't want to go home because I don't want to be by the feathers. And Maggie is like, okay, that doesn't make any sense, whatever that means. So Lisa takes Jake. Maggie leaves by herself, and Jake gives Maggie this purse before she leaves to make sure that she has this knife handy. So Maggie goes back to the house, honks on the horn, after now Tom is with Harry and his son, who are swigging back alcohol. And we have Harry who's going on and asking Tom, well, like, hey, what are you doing in this house? And we have Tom who's complaining about the water main and how it was leaking, and he had to go through the house to figure out where it was. And Harry's like, no, that doesn't make any sense. Like, what you're telling me seems like a lie. And Tom's like, yeah, about that. So Harry's to figure out that Tom was trying to find this dead body, and so by the time they get to it, Maggie is to be honking on this horn and is to try to get into the house, and now she's going to have to battle, as well as Tom, with Harry and his son. And there's knives being put into feet. There's fireplace pokers being hit onto people. We have Frank that comes in, and he was to assume to be dead, now isn't, and is gunning down both of these men. And Frank is to go on and now have that speech about, like, they were going to kill you, Tom, the both of you. And Tom is to then go outside, and Frank is to mention about the neighborhood. It's like, oh my god. So Tom did get this premonition about this, but, like, it was a little bit too early. Like, way too early to figure out what the heck that meant. So we have Samantha's body, who goes on and gets buried. And Debbie and all of Samantha's family are to be at this funeral, going on and doing this funeral, I believe. Or no, maybe it was Samantha was already buried and there was some other funeral going on. Maybe for Frank's son. So we have a funeral by the end of this film. We can say that. So, come to find out, Tom and their family were all to decide to move. They're like, F this place, we're getting out of here. Like, Tom basically destroyed the house anyways. Plus, they had a dead body in their house. Like, yeah, anybody and their brother would just go on and be like, yeah, we're getting out of here. So they leave, and that is to be like the big thing out of this is that Jake is going to go through every part of this neighborhood and start seeing every single ghost, and he is to kind of try to clog his ears. And we have a ghost that is whispering Jake a little bit louder than all the others, and so Jake is just trying to, like, no, I don't want to hear any of this, because this guy is to be like a beacon, and all these ghosts want to get their mystery solved, and Jake wants no part of it. So I guess why they were probably thinking that there was going to be a sequel out of this, but somehow it just went the way it did. So with that said, I think I'm going to go the way I'm going to go, and hopefully get out of here. I apologize for how many times that I paused this video. Things were happening while I was doing this, so it was just like, okay, like it was much better off to just kind of pause, so that way I wouldn't have to pause during a video. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody. Let me know in the comments below how you felt about Stir of Echoes, because at the end of the day, this was an interesting movie. So with that said, bye everybody. Bye everybody.